Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, and I am still the executive producer of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, Jimmy Young, filling in for the vacationing Elena Pinto. This is the time when we look at the cannabis news from around the world in our international block, and this, of course, is the beginning of European Cannabis Week, and that's where Ben Stevens and his business of Cannabis has been very busy, and they've teamed up with Mary Jane Berlin for a major trade show in Germany. Now, last week, I talked with Jamie Pearson from the New Holland Group about growth opportunities in that country despite its changing political makeup.
But you can order cannabis and have it delivered to your door, Uber Eats, all, DoorDash, that kind of thing. And so it was getting exploited. And hey, did anybody die? No. So, the reality is it's much ado about nothing. But there is a smell of cannabis everywhere, which, some lawmakers are not a fan of. And the other piece of this is they're not getting tax revenue until we get into the adult use pilot program, because they're not going to tax their medical patients. So right now they're not getting addicted to tax revenue, and they really aren't going to see any of that revenue come in unless they start with the pilot programs. So I think we're going to see some of that movement. Fingers crossed, dust off my crystal ball. But the people in the know seem to think it's going to come, fairly soon. And then here's the thing. The companies in Germany are profitable for the most part. This is a profitable enterprise. Pricing has remained relatively stable. And the part that blows my mind is that the way the German government allowed for import, you can import through the countries that have legal import status, like Colombia, like Australia, like Canada, like Israel. And you as a buyer selling into the German pharmaceutical, the Apotheke, the pharmacies, you can go shop for really good quality cannabis at a really cheap price. And the German cannabis that is being sold through the medical program is significantly cheaper than the illicit market cannabis, which is mind-blowing to me.
Over the past few weeks, Ben Stevenson, the editor of the Business of Cannabis Weekly, was focused on European Cannabis Week, and of course he's hosting a few events at the Mary Jane Trade Show in Berlin, Germany. Meanwhile, Dave Barton, our New England correspondent, is back and ready for an update from that country.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. 500,000 medical cannabis patients in the next 5 years? That's what Grow Group's managing director, Pierre van Vepperen, wants to see, according to a recent interview with Cannabis Health magazine. But is it realistic? It's taken nearly 7 years to get UK patient numbers to just under 100,000. However, according to Van Vepperen, the increasing affordability of private clinics here in Britain, combined with patient access schemes, make medical cannabis a viable option. This against the backdrop of an underfunded NHS, with long waiting lists and many unable to access the treatment they need when they need it. The Grow Group chief references how a new breed of empowered patients are taking matters into their own hands and getting medical cannabis prescriptions. These comments come ahead of Cannabis Europa, which takes place in London next week, 24th and 25th of June at the Barbican Centre in London. For my next report, I'll be sharing some updates from the event. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is a high demand when it comes to the medical aspect of our cannabis, especially for international distribution, So we're talking about, especially in German, the cannabis import from Canada doubled between the year of 2023 to 2024, and that highlights the Europe's growing appetite. Canadians firmly believe that this is going to not only help us earn significantly here in Canada, but also will be helping the overall GDP when it comes to both our country and theirs. So this is something that we are obviously looking closely at and are very happy to hear, because our cannabis is growing.
The state of Pennsylvania continues to make noise about becoming the 25th adult use legal state to launch on the East Coast. But after one bill just didn't sit well with many in that state, there is now more movement as their governor, Josh Shapiro, continues to push his legislators to come up with a fair, balanced bill. So far, that's all that is happening in Pennsylvania. A lot of talk and not a lot of movement. We'll see how long that takes. Meanwhile, in Michigan this week, prices continue to fall, but the fight continues for advocates in that state for more reforms. Our own Amie Carter is always busy, and this week she spoke at a rally in her home state, something she does all the time. Here's Amie in Michigan.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Douglas County Sheriff's Office in Wisconsin has seized over 11 pounds of cannabis that came from Michigan, reminding residents that legal weed from Michigan or Minnesota cannot be used in Wisconsin. They warned, don't bring your legal weed to Douglas County, emphasizing that transporting it there could lead to prison. The Michigan Republican Cannabis Caucus is rallying against two bills that would allow police to collect saliva samples from drivers for impairment tests. They argue the tests are unreliable, citing a previous pilot program's flaws. Caucus Chair George Brinko labeled the bills corporate welfare for drug testing companies and is urging public opposition. Over on the west side of the state, Niles Township has approved 21 cannabis dispensary licenses, aiming to boost economic development. The Greater Niles chapter of Chamber of Commerce president believes not all licenses will be utilized, but sees potential for increased tax revenue and revitalization of the area, particularly taking advantage of Indiana's slow progress on legalization. That's the highlights for this week. Stay lifted, Michigan. This is Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One more note out of Washington, D.C. A group of conservative Republican senators have reintroduced a bill that aims to increase penalties for all THC-infused edibles that look like candy. Led by Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa, the Combating Violent and Dangerous Crime Act targets substances derived from Schedule I drugs, including cannabis, which is still listed under the Controlled Substances Act. Just another reason why federal reform with fair regulations is so needed at the federal level. Now let's check in with Kimmie Cannabis to see what's going on in that Sooner state.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Oklahoma cannabis community was shaken this week when Modern Medicine Farm, a major live resin producer, burned down. And while everyone's still processing the loss, competitors are already raising prices due to the supply gap. Now, at first glance, this might seem like price gouging, but many in the industry say this correction might be long overdue. Since 2020, Oklahoma's market has been so oversaturated. Big players and small farms raced each other to the bottom. Prices have been far too low for far too long, and that directly impacts quality, sustainability, and longevity. So while it's unfortunate that it takes something like a fire, this could be the wake-up call we needed. If we would all work together on fair MSRPs, then pricing would reflect value and quality, not just desperation or survival. In other news, the new pre-packaging rules, a nightmare for most. Businesses are reporting rising costs, wasteful packaging, and major frustration trying to adapt. This new normal is anything but smooth, and concerns are growing over both environmental and financial impact. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, I'll highlight some of the details of SB 558, which Governor Kotek has signed into law. These items still need to go through rulemaking and will become effective January 1st, 2026. Senate Bill 558 is a modernization bill driven by the Cannabis Industry Alliance of Oregon, CHOW, and its members. It delivers practical, business-friendly updates for Oregon licensees, expanding what you can do at industry events and with your staff, and providing new tools for growth, training, and collaboration. This is a great example of how trade associations can help drive the industry forward. Here's some details. First, it expands trade sample allowances so that the industry can have more robust training, better quality control, improved wholesale marketing, and smarter buying. Licensees will be able to distribute samples representing their entire product line, proportional to the number of employees receiving them. And you should no longer have to record which employee got which sample in metric. So this will reduce administrative burdens on licensees. Next, it enables cannabis licensees to distribute trade samples at OLCC registered industry events. So no more separate deliveries. And paired with the ability to do actual transfers and sales at B2B events, this will greatly improve efficiency. So we can now do direct sales at wholesale events as opposed to just taking orders and then arranging for delivery later. It also enables producer-to-producer flower transfers without common ownership. So what that means is that farms can sell flower back and forth amongst each other without having to use an intermediary as the wholesaler. And finally, it permits producers to provide trade samples of seeds and immature plant samples to their own employees. So producers can provide samples of plants that employees can grow in their own yard for training and cultivation, of course, within legal possession limits. The OLCC may require tracking, but not stricter than for samples to customers. So these are some great advancements that the OLCC will work on rulemaking and will be implemented by next January. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
California is just days away from another increase in taxes on cannabis sales. California Governor Gavin Newsom is using his executive powers to impose a 4% increase in excise tax in that state, now increasing it from 15% to 19%. The change is scheduled to go into effect on July 1st. Now, there are efforts in the California legislature to try to stop that increase, but with only days to go now that we're in the last week of June, changing or stopping that increase is minimal. There's an interesting breakdown now of a $35 adult use legal purchase of 1/8 of an ounce. That breaks down if you start with a $35 fee, and then of course you add in the local business tax of 10% and a $3 service fee. And for this example, we'll throw in a $5 delivery fee. That brings your total to $46.50. Now add in the California excise tax at that proposed 19%. So you add in another $8.84 for a total of $55.34. Oh wait, I didn't even calculate the 9.75 sales tax. Now that total is up to $60.74, almost twice as much of the original price. This is the cost of cannabis legalization for consumers who, for over decades of prohibition, managed to find a legal, or make that illegal, untested provider of the product in their back room, in the parking lot, or wherever. This is why there's so many issues with this industry. Remember, legalization was supposed to put an end to that legacy market. Instead, the opposite has happened. Now let's check in with our friend in Missouri, Brandon Jones, who is always right in the middle of some event in the Show Me state. This one in Kansas City. Here's Brandon.
Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution, Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And I'm live from downtown Kansas City at the 18th and Vine District, very historic district for a Juneteenth event. I'm actually right in front of the I'm So KC store right here. That's owned by one of the local hip hop artists, Big Papa. And he has all sorts of local brands and t-shirts like Streets that are famous here, like Prospect and Troops. They're some of the most famous districts in the African community here inside Kansas City. So yes, there are actual cannabis companies out here. I'm representing Herbal Refreshment, which is a THCA brand that we touched upon a little bit last week. And we're out here just talking to the people out here enjoying the event. And yes, there's other vendors around that have cannabis items as well as non-cannabis, and it's just a welcome event down here. One other thing that's happening in news here in Missouri is micro license. We talked about them before, and they have never actually gotten to fruition. But our first one made its first sale a week and a half ago. 816 Dispensary was the first micro licensed dispensary in the state of Missouri to record a sale here in the state. That happened last week, so you should check them out. It's the whole different ecosphere where the plants come from a different cultivation plant than those in the licensed facility. So that things happening new all the time here in Missouri. So if you can, come check out the events. Again, 18th in Vine, Juneteenth. I'm Brandon Jones from Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Stay medicated and educated. Have a great week.
Have you ever wondered why some cannabis has that skunky smell? For a long time, intense smells from the plant would indicate the quality of the flower and the intense impact it could have on those who are consuming it. Well, now, growers are becoming more and more sophisticated and scientific with the flower that they're producing, and some even have citrus or lavender smells, which is a far cry from the intense, stinky skunk smell. Like many flower, the effects come from the terpene profiles in the plant. Each plant can have as many as 100 terpenes. The skunky smell is derived by myrcene and thiols. Many growers are now trying to deliver flower with cleaner, fresher smells and more scientific cultivation in order to deliver a more refined consumer experience. Cannabis is becoming more and more like different wine varietals, and it's something our Chicago clone guy, Mark Allen, knows all about. Here's his report this week from his state of Illinois.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy, tuning in for Cannabis Coast to Coast News just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Thanks for tuning in. This is Bird, as always. Always something going on here in Illinois. I actually like reporting this one. There's a local company called the Spliff Society. They actually do botanical, tobacco-free cones, pre-rolls, like all different types, which is pretty cool. They're local here to Chicagoland. They actually teamed up with a local craft grower called Galaxy Labs Craft Flower to do pre-rolls. So it's nice to see like a local small guy, quote unquote, teaming up with, I guess another craft with smaller grower. But, Illinois is starting to get on the map with some new products and some new types of companies that are coming out. I love seeing it. Industry's starting to boom here a little bit with the cannabis. More news. University of Illinois and the Department of Crop Sciences is scheduled to host its annual hemp research open house soon. Simply put, that's going to be a good event for all hemp farmers, including me. I'm a hemp farmer. For us to go there, and anybody, honestly, that wants to learn more about it and find out what's going on. It's going to be a great place for networking. There's going to be presentations. There's going to be vendors. There's even going to be research plat tours. So you guys should get around University of Illinois a little bit in Champaign, Illinois, and check that out. But that sums up the news for Illinois. I am Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, that'll do it for the B Block, our second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week. But don't go away. We've got an exclusive interview with the former editor of High Times magazine. That'll be Steve Bloom, the celeb stoner himself out of New York. And we get his reaction to the rescuing of High Times from receivership by the CEO of Raw Papers, Josh Kesselman. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings, right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.